Okay, we are back, and hopefully you have built your phylogeny. So now I'm going to build it with you guys. So again, we look at the one trait that is shared by everyone, and that is this horseshoe shape, right? So that's our most ancestral trait. And so we put our horseshoe, right? And that's A, B, C, D, E, and F. Okay, now we look, and we actually have two traits, this pentagon and the X, that are shared by everybody except for F. Okay, so again, F, I'm just going to put it way down here, and so we give ourselves room. And then we have these other two shapes. We don't know which of these evolved first, but at some point after they split from F, this pentagon and this X evolved, okay? And maybe if we put some more species in here, we would see somebody has the pentagon but not X, or X and not the pentagon, and then we would know. But based on what we have now, we don't know which evolved first, but we know that all of them share this, okay? Okay, now we have some other splits here, right? We see that, and let me see if I can change colors here. Looking for my color a bit. Oh, sorry guys. Here we go. Okay, we see that A and D share some things, and then we also see that like B, C, and E share some things. Okay, so we've got another split here. So if we're going to split this in two, and A and D are along one line, and I've got them in red here, so I'll show, right? So we've got our circle here, A and D share, okay? So this is A, and D went along this path. And then A has something that D doesn't have, okay? So A got a square, and D doesn't have any new traits. Okay, so we've completed those. We did this one, and we just did the square, and we did the circle, right? And then if we go and look at the BCE path, right, they all share this rectangle. So there's our B, C, and E. Okay, and then we see that B and E share something that C doesn't. So we must have C divides here, and B and E are together, right? So B and E got this rectangle. Sorry, B and E got this like hourglass shape. So this is B and E. Okay, and then E gets the last special trait here. So B and E again divide, and E has the star, okay, that B doesn't have. So this is what your tree should look like. Again, things may be spun around here, but in your final tree, F should be the least related to everybody and split off first. You may have F at the top, you may have F at the bottom. And then as you're doing your divisions, there's one group with A and D together, and they may be flipped and below B, E, and C, right? Or they may be above like I have it. And then B, C, and E are in a group, but within that group of these three of B, C, and E, B and E are more closely related to each other than they are to C. Okay, so your tree should look something like this. Now, if we go back and look at what these traits are, shoot, there's somewhere, maybe it's the back of our, hold on, I need to open up like the lab itself. It tells you kind of what those traits were. So let me see. Okay, so if we look, yep, it's the back of the lab itself. The horseshoe shape, this was vertebrae, okay? So we're looking at all vertebrates, and all vertebrates, that's, you know, something that they all have in common. And then this pentagon shape are lungs. So F is something that doesn't have lungs. So this is going to be like a fish, right? So a vertebrate that doesn't have lungs. So we've already figured out what F is here. Okay, so we've got lungs, and then our X shape is a tetrapod. This means that it has 4 limbs. Okay, so arms and legs. So these are terrestrial vertebrates, things that live on land. They breathe air and they walk around. It also could be birds, right? So their arms, their wings used to be something that walked around, right? So they've got 4 distinct limbs as opposed to fins like a fish does. Okay. And we don't really know, based on what we have here, they all have lungs, they all have 4 limbs. We don't know which came first. So that's why, you know, A, B, C, D, and E are all lumped together with those 2 traits. Okay, our circle here is hair up here. So A and D that we've got here are both mammals, right? Things that have hair. And that divides them from the rectangle, which is a special kind of skull that birds and reptiles and even dinosaurs shared, that mammals don't have. And again, you don't need to memorize all of these traits. You need to understand how to look at this tree, right? And understand the relationships. Okay, the next trait that's square is the rumen. So this is the special stomach. If you knew that like cows chew their cuds, they like eat their food and then they like kind of throw it up and chew it again, and then they digest it in another stomach. Okay, that's a special kind of stomach that only cows have, or other animals that chew their cud. So like sheep and things like that, like grazing animals. And then this hourglass shape are non-overlapping scales. So it's a special kind of scale. And those scales are shared by birds and crocodiles, but like lizards and snakes have overlapping scales. And it shows a little picture at the back of your lab. So birds and crocodiles have a particular kind of scale that other reptiles don't. And then our star is feathers. And so obviously those are birds, right? So here now we can say that like A is, I think like it's a cow or a sheep, right? B is a crocodile, right? They share that with birds, those scales. C is a snake. D is some non-ruminant mammal. I think in this case, they may have put a human in. We can look at the back of the lab again. E is a bird. And F is going to be a fish. Okay. So let me go to the lab, like the fillable PDF, and it shows you, yeah, so they've got a cow is our ruminant, so cow or sheep. A crocodile is our is what we've got for B there. An iguana, so I said snake. They have iguana, so another reptile. A human is D. A pigeon is the bird that they've got for E. And a shark is their fish. So those are all of the, that's at the back of your phylogeny handout. Those are all of the species that we were working with. Okay, so now let's look at the lab again and the questions at the back, the questions about it, reading the tree, okay? So we just built this whole phylogeny. And could you draw it differently? So I'm looking at question 3 on the second page of it. Like, could you have drawn it differently and have gotten it correct? And the answer is yes, right? Because you could have spun around on any of these nodes that I'm now going to like color in red, right? Like right here, it could spin and F could have been above everything else. Or here we could have spun it and have like B, C, and E above A and D, right? So you can move things around and it's showing the exact same thing. I showed you that in the previous video, right? Can you tell which came first, the X or the pentagon? Okay, no, we can't, right? So here we've got the X and the pentagon. We don't have any species that have one and not the other, right? We can tell that like the horseshoe shape came before the X and the pentagon because that's shared by more individuals. But we can't tell for the X and the pentagon because everybody has it, right? That they kind of evolved at the same time based on what we have here. Okay, now continuing to look at these questions. We converted our runners to species. And I'm just going through now towards the end of the lab, reading the tree. This is on like the 7th page of this lab. And I'm sorry, I don't have the lab manual with the same numbers on it, but it's the next set of questions about reading the tree. Is an iguana more closely related to a trout or a cow? Okay, so they're basically asking, is this iguana, which we have here, it's not a snake, it's an iguana, is C. So is C more closely related to a snake, which is, oh wait, what did they ask? A trout or a cow, so a fish. So is C more closely related to a fish, F, or a cow, A? Well, so what you have to do is go backwards in time and see when did they most recently share an ancestor. If we go backwards from C and we kind of trace this line back, ooh, here, where I have this big red circle now, is where they most recently share an ancestor with A, with our cow, but you have to go all the way back to where they share with F, back here. Okay, so that's going almost all the way to the beginning. So they more recently share an ancestor with a cow because you're not going as far back in time to where they share one of these nodes, to where this split was, right? So they're more closely related to a cow than a fish. Is a crocodile more closely related to a human or a cow? Oh, well, that's an interesting question. All right, so for that, let's trace this line in green now. So here we've got our crocodile was B. Well, you know what, I'll do a different color because I've got yellow on here already. Okay, so here's B. Okay, if we trace this back, that doesn't really show up, does it? I'll do it in black. Okay, B, here's B, and we're gonna trace it back to where it shares with, oh, it's both the human and the cow. Do you see? So that as the same distance from both a human and a cow, the mammals split off as a whole group. The crocodile is equally related to a human and to a cow because their split is at the exact same point right here. There's not a separate time that a crocodile was more closely related to a cow and then that split off separately. So the crocodile is equally related to a human and to a cow. Okay. So thinking about like what are the runners are species, right? The check-in stations, those where they're getting their stamps, those are kind of like new adaptations that they're getting, right? New evolutionary traits. And the race course itself is just time, right? They're moving through time and collecting adaptations and evolving as they go. Okay. Okay, can you determine relationships between runners by looking at their positions on the finish line? In other words, if you go from left to right, do the runners always emerge in the same order? Well, yes, like A and D are always going to be more closely related to each other, right? Based on the fact that they share a node, right? Closer to the right side, where at more recent times than in the past. And then it says, is it valid to assume that runners receive an empty card at the start and they always gain but never lose stamps? And that's not true, right? All organisms have started with something, right? Like some DNA or some traits that they got from their ancestors. No one's really a totally blank, fresh slate of a cell that has, no history. And you can actually lose traits, right? Humans have lost their tail. If we think about vestigial traits that we no longer have, some like whales have gone back to the water. They evolved from land mammals and they've lost their arms and legs, right? So runners can lose stamps too, but in these cases, what we were looking at was gaining new traits. It says there was no stamp for a vertebral column. All of them have this trait. If this trait is added to the tree, where would it be added? There actually was a stamp for a vertebral column, so I'm not sure why it says that, right? Like there's this arch was the vertebral column and they all got it at the beginning, right? So which organisms have the most traits on this tree? Well, we've got, I think, the cow and the bird both had traits right at the very end, but that doesn't mean they're more evolved. We weren't looking at all the traits that a human has that a cow doesn't have, or that a crocodile has that a bird doesn't have, right? So then we have this last question, which is kind of interesting to ponder. When West Nile virus first arrived in the US, it was observed in birds, horses, and people. Okay, the normal host is birds, and it's easily transmitted between birds. Okay, so it's a bird virus. It's much rarer and less deadly in humans and horses, but it had a big impact on crocodile farms. Okay, so does that make sense? If you think about that, yes, if we look at this, birds and crocodiles, I'm circling here, right, B and E, they are very closely related. So a virus that affects a bird could much more easily jump to a crocodile, right? Then it could go all the way back and then up over to mammals over here, right? So horses and humans would be over here where A and D are, and then up over to mammals over here, right? So horses and humans would be over here where A and D are, which is pretty distinct from B and E. So that's why avian flus, avian viruses, they can sometimes impact mammals, but they're much less likely to because they have evolved, along a different line. And so they tend to impact other birds and things closely related to birds like crocodiles. Okay, so that is it for this lab. And again, any questions you have, we can go over, you can send me emails, or we can go over when we do our reviews, just how to basically read a phylogeny. You won't have to build, let me go to a view so you guys can see my face, hold on. You won't have to build anything this big on a test. Okay, so it's really just, if you're given a few traits, can you build a tree? Can you say whether the tree, if you're shown a tree, does that match this? Can you say who's most closely related? Can you say what an ancestral trait is? Like in this case, it would be the horseshoe, right? Versus a trait that came later on, like the star, right? So can you kind of interpret the information that you're given for just a few traits? So this example that we had was a big one. And it was a long one with a lot of traits. But if you can build that, then you can definitely do the easy ones, right? Like if you can do a 2-gene Punnett square, you can easily do a 1-gene, right? So we kind of went for the big example here, and then on a test, you'd be working with smaller examples. Okay, so I'm going to log off here, and then we're going to have another video to discuss the next lab.